it's Naya. Welcome back to Naya Reads and Smiles. In the month of January, I read 5 books, 4 physical books, and 1 audiobook. And yes, it was an amazing reading month. 2019 has been wonderful so far, reading-wise. Every single one of the books I read this month was amazing, and emotional, and wonderful. All the adjectives, honey, all the adjectives. Without further ado, let's get into this video because we got some tears to shed. Okay, so the first book, you guys already know. Of course you know. I finished Kingdom of Ash earlier this month. It was all the things. It was all the things. Kingdom of Ash is the very last book in the Throne of Glass series. I have been reading the Throne of Glass series since I was 15, so finishing this book for me was really, really hard. But we did it, guys. I did it. I finished it. There are 6 books before this one, and like I said, this is a high fantasy series, so I honestly cannot describe to you what this book is about, because by the time you get to the 6th book in Sarah J Maas's like series, you just like half of the words aren't even real words, you know what I mean? I tried so hard to vlog while reading this book, you guys, but it was just a tear fest. She took all these threads that she had created in the past 6 books over the past, what, 10 years she's been writing this series, and she finally brought everything together. She brought everyone together. How she was able to plot some of the stuff in this book, because it was so like just intelligently thought out, and things that she mentioned way back in the first book that I haven't thought about since like reading the first book, she somehow was able to weave back into this book. You know, characters that we only saw once or twice in the second book, she brought back in this book. She does something that just absolutely blew my mind, and I'm gonna insert some vlog footage of me at 3 in the morning reading the very last like 100 pages, but something that happened like at the 800 page mark that just blew my mind, and I was just having an existential crisis. Yes, I'm gonna insert that clip now. Just a warning, like I said, it was like 3 in the morning and I had not slept for probably a day. I'd spent the whole day just reading this book, so I was very delirious, very sleep deprived. It is currently 3:59. Oh my god. I have no words for what. Oh my god. It was really hard to finish. I can't even fathom that this whole Throne of Glass series is over now, but I'm excited to see what Sarah J Maas is going to write next. I know she plans on writing an adult urban fantasy novel called Crescent City. She announced it on like the EW website, I think. But I'm so excited for that series. I'm excited to see her write fantasy in the real world. Okay, so the second book I read was actually a self-published poetry collection. Taming the Lion by Aisha S. Ghulam. I'm sorry, Aisha, if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong. Taming the Lion. Oh my gosh. Now, I had seen little snippets of poems that were in this novel on her Instagram, and they just seemed so wonderful, and I finally got her poetry collection, which I believe came out in December. This was such a beautiful poetry collection. I cried several times reading it. Aisha is actually a Muslim Indian American author, and she is just so incredibly talented. Poems in this book are mainly about self-worth and healing. I think what makes this poetry collection really unique is Aisha's perspective. I think she has a very intersectional perspective on self-worth and self-healing. Honestly, this poetry collection is so underrated, and I definitely plan on going back and rereading it again, because I feel like it's just one of those poetry collections, you know, that you have to go back. The next book I read was my classic book of this month, and this book blew my mind. I can't even believe it's a classic. A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and if you can tell by just the sheer number of sticky notes, where do I even begin with The Picture of Dorian Gray? Like, some of you commented saying that I should pick up this book, and the title sounded familiar, and I realized this novel, both in 10th and 11th grade for me in high school, this was on my required reading list, but both my teachers decided to take this novel off of our required reading list. But after having read this book, I understand now why the teacher said we just wouldn't have enough time to fully dive into it, because Oscar Wilde is just a philosophical genius. The ideas and the concepts that he just talks about in this book is beyond anything I have ever read. Before going into this book, I didn't really know much about Oscar Wilde. There's actually a picture of him that I love so much, and it's in the front of this book, and I was like, oh gosh, the book, just look at this. Like, after I got about halfway through this book, I was really curious about the author because I was just so blown away with what he was writing, what the story was about, and I was just like, you know what, pause, let me do a little research because Oscar Wilde is just someone I want to meet and have a conversation with. And I found out he was a very controversial author. He was actually sentenced to jail time or sentenced to like community service or something like that for being gay, which is insane. So a lot of the stuff that he was writing back in this time sort of had an undercurrent of like a secret gay agenda, as some people have commented, which I absolutely love. And I just want to say before you go into this book, there's definitely two ways to read it, okay? There's a straight way, and then there's the fun way to read it, which is how I recommend you should read it. Definitely do a little research on Oscar Wilde before going into it because it'll definitely change your perspective. Go back like I did and read it and be like, oh, so that's what he meant when he said this. This entire book is about this character named Dorian Gray. Now Dorian Gray is this beautiful, brainless creature as the painter in this book described. Dorian Gray meets this artist, this painter, who becomes just fascinated with him and is just blown away by his beauty. It was really strange at first because usually, you know, in a lot of classic books, the main character is this like beautiful, fair maiden who's, you know, really sort of naive and has this innocence about them. And Oscar Wilde totally flipped that narrative, and instead of it being like a female main character who's like the muse of this artist, it's a male character. And this is like where I said the secret gay agenda kind of comes in a little bit, which I had no idea was what Oscar Wilde was kind of like writing about until I read his autobiography or his biography. So we have Dorian Gray, who is sort of the fair maiden of this novel, and he's beautiful but also innocent and doesn't really know much about life. He comes from a very wealthy family and kind of has this tragic past and has just been living off of his parents' money. In this book, the painter, he just sees Dorian as this just sort of untouched, you know, like person lucky enough to haven't have gone through anything and haven't really experienced anything, and it's that sort of innocence that makes him so beautiful. That is until Dorian meets this other man who just totally changes his life by giving him ideas or by putting ideas in his head. This other person is highly philosophical and slightly pessimistic. Kind of makes Dorian obsessed with his own youth. After the artist finishes painting this portrait of him, he becomes jealous of the painting because he sees in this painting something that he'll never be able to achieve again. In that moment, he was perfectly youthful and perfectly sort of unaware of the world, and he was just at the height of his youth. And now every minute that passes from the moment that painting was finished, he is just aging and growing old, and he's just, yeah, so he becomes like a narcissist. So I don't know if you guys have read the Greek story of Narcissus. He's like this man that sees his own reflection in a river or a lake or something and just becomes like obsessed with himself. So that's kind of what happens with Dorian, is he just becomes obsessed with himself, and he makes sort of this deal with the devil where now this painting holds his soul. So anytime he sins or anytime he does something bad, it will be reflected on the painting instead of him. So he'll forever remain youthful and beautiful, but that painting will slowly deteriorate and like turn ugly like his soul will. There's this incredible character arc throughout the book. You know, Dorian starts off as this really innocent, you know, character who's unaware of his own beauty, and then he becomes obsessed, and then he becomes like sinful and just does all this bad stuff now that he knows it won't reflect on his physical appearance. There's so many ideas that Oscar Wilde touches on, and the entire book, like every 2 pages, I was highlighting quotes just because it was just, it was so good. I highly recommend you read this book. If you're someone like me who's never read a lot of classic books, read this book because honestly it feels like Oscar Wilde could have wrote it yesterday. A lot of classic novels, the vocabulary can seem very archaic and really dense, and that's why personally for me I never really got into classics. It's because I had a hard time. I think I read Shakespeare when I was like 13, and after that I was like, no, I don't understand any of this. It's like a foreign language. Oscar Wilde really keeps it simple when it comes to his writing style, but so just like, clever and just, it was so good. I'm just obsessed with Oscar Wilde now. I'll probably in the month of February will read another one of his works. But yes, I could talk about it forever, but I'm gonna stop now and just hopefully you guys will pick it up because it was wonderful. The next book I listened to in audiobook form, which was so amazing, Becoming by Michelle Obama. It is Michelle Obama's new book that just recently came out. Michelle Obama was the former First Lady of the United States. I really, really hope she runs for presidency because I will vote for her in a heartbeat. Michelle Obama is one of my just idols in life. She is so smart, so intelligent, and has just done so much for this country and just so much behind the scenes, which I had no idea. The whole book was about her life from her early childhood all the way up until she became the First Lady, and it is so inspiring, you guys. Like, I learned so much about her that I had no idea. She grew up in Chicago and she just had just such an interesting childhood, and she saw firsthand everything that she wanted to change in this world. She was just able to climb and reach the top of the ladder in so many aspects of her life, in career, in education, you know, which just were not common for Black women, for women from her community. And there was one story in the autobiography that just really, like, I was able to relate to it so much. When she was like 9 or 10 years old, one of her relatives, her aunts, taught her how to play the piano, and she practiced every day and she was really good at it, and she got the opportunity to actually play in like a recital hall, I think that's what they're called, or like an auditorium. She remembers going on stage and sitting down at this beautiful grand piano. Never in her life had she been able to play like a piano like that, and she sat down and she looked down at the keys and she froze. She describes how, you know, she would practice every single day, but she only ever practiced on her aunt's piano, and her aunt had this really sort of old banged up piano. There was like a chip in the key and it wasn't really perfectly tuned, but this piano, it was perfect. It was perfectly polished. It was brand new. She was able to play the piano. She knew how to play the piano, but never in her life had she played a perfect piano, and that was such a powerful moment for me when I read it. Anyways, that's just one part of the book that really just touched me. And yes, the autobiography is actually narrated by Michelle. Anyways, I highly recommend it. Before I lose my voice, the very last book that I read this month, which I did not plan on reading, but after I finished Kingdom of Ash, I was just, you know, I was just in Sarah J Maas's writing and I needed to read more of her writing. So I decided to reread A Court of Thorns and Roses again. I know, I've read it like 4 times now, but I love it so much. I will forever love this book, okay? And every time I read it, it's just like, oh, it's just an experience that I just, oh my god, I don't know why I do this to myself, why I go back and reread my favorite books, because they always just make me so emotional. I've read the entire series and I am so excited for the next 3 books that are coming out. Okay, yeah, it was a snowy Monday last week and I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna pick it up. Sarah J Maas, like her writing is just so easy for me, you know, like it's easy to fall into her world, and I know I've read it before and that's probably why it's also really easy for me to get into her books, is because I know what's gonna happen, but it's just, her writing is just so, like, it just hooks you and then you're just in it. Anyways, those are all the books I read in January. I'm so excited for February. I have a TBR coming, which should be up after this video. Until next time, keep reading and I will talk to you guys later. Bye!